report. Thank you, Rich.
So the financial report through January does show a positive balance of $372,678. We are still assuming we're going to be reimbursed for all the items to Storm Ida. I do want to report we have received 3 checks totaling $282,000. So we are waiting one final reimbursement for $69,000, but the bulk of the funds have been received and posted. We should get that final check, I'm thinking probably in sometime in March or early April. So the total changes from the previous month are $33,440. Those changes include unfilled student interns from the high school and the middle school. If we recall earlier in the year, the fall interns were not filled as well. This will be the case for the spring interns as well. There's a small amount of salary savings for instructional para that turned over at Holmes for $982. Some step savings at Tokenique and Oxford for $4,400. Reserve for emergency repairs does show a negative balance of $9,125. That's just the change for the deductible for the storm cost. So we will have to cover $10,000. Once we get that final check, we'll probably make a recommendation for a transfer to cover that deductible. In terms of a non-flood item for reserve for emergency repairs, we do have a leak in a water heater at the middle school. That is a negative balance of $16,000, which we'll discuss later, and is a recommended transfer for this month. We are showing another reduction in building rentals for $9,100. A couple of organizations have indicated that they will have reduced enrollment this year, so we are anticipating a lower revenue for building rentals. But as we've mentioned previously, field rentals is actually up, so the two essentially net together at this point. Superintendent consultants are under budget by $921. District and special ed legal fees continue to trend down at about $10,000. The annual audit did come in under budget by $1,200. Diesel fuel for the buses is under budget by about $19,000, and this really relates to the bus driver shortage. If you recall earlier in the year, we were using non-first student buses for athletics because we didn't have the drivers. Since we didn't have the drivers and we couldn't use the buses, we're saving on diesel fuel. Fitch Transportation is under budget by about $7,000. We have been able to utilize the Suburbans more, especially with the third Suburban. Utilities are a negative $77,690, and it's primarily heat consumption. Kremer policies have a savings of $5,600, and that's primarily due to reimbursement for workers' comp. Medicaid revenue is slightly higher at $2,500. We do have additional salary savings in ELP para for $5,700. ELP tuition has been reduced by about $8,000. We do have an additional student who's been classified as special education. As we talked about at a previous board meeting, we do have a substitute for the COVID compliance officer. So that is a deficit of $5,000, which has a pending transfer. And then nurses in RC 28 also show a deficit of $3,200 as the nurses were granted an additional personal time. If we look at the breakdown of the RCs, the general education RCs do show a positive balance of $147,000. The special education RCs are a positive $233,000. That's primarily driven by excess costs, which we can talk about later. And then the COVID RC is a deficit of $8,200, which are those 2 nurse items mentioned earlier. Just to highlight some of the changes in the RCs, again, the high school does have a positive balance of $16,700, and that's due to the unfilled intern. The middle school has a positive balance of $16,700. That is the other balance of the unfilled intern position. No change at Holmes, Oxbridge, and Tokenique are step savings in clubs and councils. In maintenance, we did mention the reserve for emergency repair does show a deficit of $10,000 for a deductible, and that's for the storm Elsa and Ida. We also have $16,000 due to a leak in a hot water heater at middle school. The hot water heater is about 10 years old. They typically last between 10 and 15 years. Unfortunately, it did fail at that early part of the range. So Mike is working on getting that repaired and fixed. So we will need a transfer to cover that. The school does still have hot water because it's leaking. It's not totally failed, but there are obviously things catching that water, and obviously we need to get that replaced. And as I mentioned earlier, revenue for use of fields and building rentals essentially net to zero. It's a positive $8,000 in revenue between the two. No change in RC 13. RC 16 legal fees continue to trend positive by about $6,000. RC 20, as I mentioned, the audit is complete and about $1,200 under budget. No change in RC 23. RC 24, we have filed the December 1st claim for excess cost at $3.6 million. As I mentioned at the previous Finance Committee meeting, We are still assuming a 67.5 reimbursement rate. As we shared, the estimated revenues last month, the state's initial revenue was 82%. They did say they expect it to come down. We get that first reimbursement for excess costs at the end of February. So for the February report, we'll probably update that reimbursement percentage. My guess is based on where claims were for the state, it'll probably be somewhere north of 75%, but under 82. In fixed RC25, regular transportation is positive balance of 26,000. Again, diesel fuel by 19,000, and that's $7,000 for fixed transportation. No other real changes in fixed except Medicaid revenue, as I mentioned, a positive 2,500. And then RC28, the COVID compliance officer is deficit of 5,000, and that is coverage for the director of nursing. And then nurses show a deficit of $3,200 for the additional personal day.
You want to stop here for questions?
Sure.
Or you want- Okay. Any questions from the committee? Mr. Maroney.
With the hot water heater, have we purchased the hot water heater and know we can get one? Because I've heard with supply chain issues.
So we do have it.
Short demand.
We do. We're expecting actually to get it tomorrow. And Mike is hopeful that it should be up and running by Monday. So essentially what this is going to do is we're using existing funds in the reserve for emergency repair, and then this transfer will essentially reimburse that account because we obviously don't want to wait with a leaky water heater.
Anything else, Tara or Dennis? No? Okay. On the field, building rentals, field use, are we predicting, okay, hard to predict, I get that. But are we looking at probably, will we potentially net out pretty close by spring? Because I would expect that in spring, do we have, my question is, do we have the capacity to have more field rentals in spring?
Sure.
We're usually pretty maxed out.
So
but-
typically, we get a lot of field rentals in the summer and then again in the spring. And then building rentals actually tend to be in the second half of the year, in the spring.
Yeah.
I would actually expect the spread to improve a little bit.
Okay.
Some of them, we already have the deposits for the spring, so that's already reflected in the forecast in the number.
Okay.
The concern really is just building rental revenue. But again, it's essentially net to zero or a positive 7,000. I don't see it swinging into the other way
Okay.
where we actually collect less revenue and we have a shortfall.
Okay, thank you. All right. Same thing on diesel fuel. Are we gonna, what's the spread gonna be there? Are we gonna,
So we've actually started to get the ability to use some of our first student drivers for transportation for athletics.
yeah,
So we'd expect probably to normalize.
okay,
We might have a little bit of additional savings because some transportation was booked in advance, not knowing if we'd get the drivers. But for the most part, I would expect what we're seeing here in that $19,000 range to be relatively close to
okay,
what we see. We do have a locked-in diesel rate for this year, so
Okay.
the inflationary cost associated with utilities
okay,
is not going to affect us until the following fiscal year.
okay. And then on the reserve for emergency repair, you know, as manufacturing methods change and we're moving away from sort of, I think it's better in the commercial or industrial space, but we're moving away from long-term, you know, water heaters that should last a long period of time to shorter term. Are we seeing any difference in how that fund gets used? And are we anticipating that we could, based on the fact that a lot of things are not built to last the way they used to be?
Sure. A lot of times it's things like the water heater that breaks. Sometimes it's emergency termite use is also something that we've had, or
Okay,
emergency exterminating.
okay,
We haven't seen, other than the flood, which was really kind of put to the side, we haven't seen any significant emergencies other than the water heater.
okay,
In the past, we've had other issues, whether it be roof leaks or things like that.
Right.
But you know, so far so good if we exclude the flood, which was obviously pretty significant.
okay. Thank you. Anything else? Okay, let's move on to budget transfers, please.
So we do have 3 transfers for consideration. The first is for $5,000, and that is to fund the substitute COVID compliance officer. We are recommending taking the funds from the savings and diesel fuel. The next transfer is for $3,200, and that is for the additional personal days granted to the nurses union. And we are again recommending taking that from diesel fuel savings. And then the hot water heater at the middle school for $16,000. And we're recommending taking that savings from diesel fuel savings and the Fitch transportation savings.
Any questions?
No.
No, okay. So will it be the recommendation of the committee that we move forward with these transfers? Yes, okay. The committee will recommend we move forward with these transfers. Okay? Any other questions before we go to public comment?
No.
Any other comments, Alan or Rich?
I would just highlight for the food service fund, we had another good month.
Yes.
January is typically slow because you have midterms at the high school, so not a lot of kids are ordering food and sometimes lunch isn't served. But we're expecting to be cash flow positive by March.
Okay.
Sales for February, which are not reflected in here, are actually at a high for the year.
Okay.
So things are improving there as well.
Okay.
Must be pizza.
At some point, it would be nice to see sort of an overall look at Chartwells and how they're performing against, I mean, we can see it, but talk about how they're performing both qualitatively and quantitatively against now that we're in a semi-normal conditions. Okay,
It's relatively straightforward for this one as well. There is just want to mention the mask, because it's discussed about all the masks. We have lots of masks. And we had originally put in a little bit more in the COVID expenses. We mentioned this last time, but
yes,
honestly, sometimes at the end, 95 masks, people want, in some cases, they're uncomfortable to wear. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of why we, in case you wonder, because we've got thousands of masks.
okay. So we have plenty of masks. We probably, even if we need to go to the end of the school year, and we probably won't, well, if we need to purchase them, we will, but we're in
Yeah,
good
we
shape.
got plenty.
Okay, thank you. All right, with that, I'll open it up to public comment.
Good morning. For participants via Zoom, please click the raised hand option. Each participant will have up to 3 minutes to comment. There are no raised hands at this time.
Okay, may I have a motion to adjourn? Ms. Worm, all in favor? Thank you very much, everybody.